He was a man who helped many, in many different ways. During the 74 years he was alive, and the 47 years that he was on television, Fred Rogers touched many lives and taught many life lessons. Since he was born on March 20th, 1928, he explored many new ideas, encountered the problems of parents and children alike and tried to provide solutions, and exchanged knowledge and advice frequently. Fred Rogers' career was filled with exploration. In 1954, he explored the idea of working for a non-profit TV station, transitioning from working at NBC to a local Pittsburgh station, WQED. There, he was the puppeteer and provided music for an experimental children's show, The Children's Corner, which was later given an award for being the country's best locally produced children's program. His more notable program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, starred as a children's program on a Toronto TV station and was simply known as Mr. Rogers. It started in 1964, but in 1968, Rogers went back to WQED and started broadcasting his iconic show from there. The first episode of the show at WQED debuted in February of 1968. The main idea that Rogers was exploring before creating Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was having child play and TV go hand in hand. He also explored the idea of having rituals in his show, something that would be in every episode, something that, no matter what happened to the viewer, his viewer would always be able to find in every episode. These rituals could be found in the intro and outro of each episode. Examples of them were in his songs that he starts and ends the shows with: the zipping and unzipping of his cardigan, the tying and untying of his shoes, and his daily trips into the land of make-believe. Rogers' biggest experiment with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was trying to teach children something that was unique when compared to other children's programs of the time. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood may not have been the first children's show, though Fred Rogers' work with children's television began only a little bit after the release of color televisions. However, the program was the first to explore teaching children non-cognitive skills. Shows of the time, such as Sesame Street, focused on the skills needed to excel academically in preschool and early elementary school, including basic counting skills and a knowledge of the alphabet. However, Mr. Rogers taught children about emotions, socialization, and exploration of their own creativity. Mr. David Newell, who portrayed Mr. McFeely, the mailman, in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, was a key component to the show and a good friend of Rogers.
Adults didn't quite understand the concept. It's much easier to show teaching numbers and letters because you can repeat them back, children. But you never know if a child feels good about themselves with all the values that are presented on the neighborhood. Talking about angry feelings, talking about separation, talking about sibling rivalry, all of that. You never know if that's sinking in till maybe they're 15, 16 later on. So, but people didn't quite understand what some of the concepts were. Well, why is he talking about this? Why is he talking about feeling lonely when somebody leaves? Well, children do. And he would write a song about that concept, too. It was a sort of groundbreaking. People weren't doing that. They were talking about, being kind to people and eat your dinner and all of that, but not getting into really emotional topics.
One very prevalent concept emphasized uniquely in this program was the self-worth of the viewer. Rogers made sure this was absorbed by the viewer with his signature song, "You Are Special." In addition, in each episode, he spoke to the juvenile viewer watching his program as an equal, and in the process, showed them respect. Rogers also purposely stayed away from the hyperactivity emphasized in the common cartoon, believing that calmness was the key to emotional and mental growth. As time went on, Rogers explored and encountered new problems and wrote books on them for the children affected. Rogers, during a few times in his career, explored other TV shows that helped children deal with their emotions and social problems and assisted in them by appearing in an episode. Rogers appeared in an episode of Sesame Street and engaged in a conversation with Big Bird. He also provided the voice of himself for an episode of Arthur, a newer TV show based on the writings of Mark Brown on the life of an aardvark named Arthur and his friends. Rogers explored the idea of making a show that would encounter the problems of children and made it a reality. Rogers encountered a wide variety of problems that were affecting children and dealt with them in many different ways. He believed that by encountering these problems and teaching his viewers about them, that he could create confident, caring humans. He put plentiful emphasis on divorce, pointing out that children often feel responsible for the split of their parents and shouldn't feel so. Rogers also put emphasis on the recovery from the death of someone important to the viewer. In addition to encountering problems on his show, he also encountered problems with books. Some of his more recent books were written for children with a parent who's a migrant worker, children with a parent who has a mental disability, children with cancer, and many other important topics for affected children. For parents who encountered the problem that they sometimes cannot understand their child, Rogers wrote the Mr. Rogers Parenting Book. In his book, Dear Mr. Rogers, Does It Ever Rain in Your Neighborhood?, Rogers encountered and answered the questions and problems from those who wrote letters to him. Rogers also was a musician, writing around 200 songs in his lifetime. Often, these were feel-good songs because of Rogers' interest in building the self-worth of children. One of his albums, Coming and Going, was made to counter separation anxiety with positivity. Rogers also encountered problems such as physical disabilities by bringing in a child who had a disability and talking to him or her about it on his show. Such was exemplified by Jeffrey Erlanger, a young boy who was left wheelchair-bound because of a spinal tumor. Rogers' company, Family Communications, also made material to encounter problems that weren't directly related to families, including pamphlets for cops on how to deal with children. Rogers wanted to encounter and help the problems of children, and for his doing so, he was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and a Medal of Freedom. Fred Rogers exchanged plentiful words with parents and politicians over childhood development. In 1969, Rogers gave a 6-minute speech in support of a $20 million grant for children's television, saying that the programs helped children deal with common issues and assisted with boys and girls blossoming into men and women. He also lobbied for commercialist TV stations. He believed that these TV stations were valued by many, and that others should see that value and support the channels. Rogers frequently exchanged knowledge with those he was close with. Joe Negri, a jazz guitarist who portrayed Handyman Negri on The Neighborhood, said of how much he learned about music and child interaction from Rogers. Rogers also tried to change the view of skeptics on the VCR when it first came out, saying that the device would be able to bring a family together so they could all take part in watching something educational. For some, Rogers could exchange their viewpoint for another. Many viewers of The Neighborhood have said they see value differently because of him, not as money, but as joy, happiness, and time spent with loved ones. In the world of television, Fred Rogers went where no one else went before, and in the end it paid off. For over 30 years, children learned little lessons with him, and slowly developed into the responsible human beings Rogers hoped for them to be. After his death in 2003, the Pittsburgh Magazine was filled with letters from people across the country, saying how profound an influence Rogers had on them, from his co-workers at WQED to Hollywood actor Michael Keaton. Rogers' encountering of problems throughout his show and in his life in general really made him a beloved man and a beloved neighbor to all.